St. George of Merry England was the youngest and bravest of the 7 champions of Christendom. Clad in bright armour, with his magic sword Ascalon by his side, he used to travel on his war-horse in far countries in search of adventures, and many were the perils he encountered. One day, as he was riding across a marsh in the land of the pagans, he saw a noble and lovely maiden walking all alone toward the seashore. She was dressed in beautiful robes like a bride on her wedding day, but her face was pale and sorrowful, and she stared in terror at the sea. St. George rode quickly up to her. On hearing the sound of his horse's hoofs, the girl turned and cried, "Flee, young knight, flee, or you will perish too also." "God forbid that I should flee when a maiden is in peril," said St. George. As he spoke, the sea in front of him began to rise up in great waves, and from the waves there came the sound of roaring. At the same time he heard a noise far behind him. He turned and saw that the walls of the city on the hills above the marsh were crowded with people who were shrieking and wringing their hands. "The dragon! The dragon!" cried the maiden. "Flee, or it will be upon you." The sound of roaring grew louder. "Flesh and blood cannot withstand the burning flame that comes from its jaws," said the maiden. "It has destroyed 2 armies of soldiers. It has eaten up all our sheep and cattle and laid waste on my father's kingdom. Escape while you can, and do not risk your life by staying to defend me." Every year a young virgin comes to this marsh to be killed and eaten by the monster, in order to prevent it from rushing upon the city and slaying all the people. I am Princess Sabra, the daughter of the king, and the lot has now fallen upon me. Oh horror, you are too late. While Princess Sabra was speaking, the sea had risen up in great waves, and from the waves there came the sound of loud and angry roaring, which increased in volume every moment. St. George had scarcely time to clutch his spear and lift up his shield before the dragon was upon him. It was the most terrible monster ever seen on earth. It was an enormous serpent with 2 great wings and 4 strong feet armed with cruel claws, and in its tail there was a long poisonous sting. It rushed through the air upon St. George, and a burning flame came from its jaws. With a sudden stroke of its wings, it nearly felled him to the ground. But as it passed, he gave it so fierce a thrust with his spear that his spear broke into 1,000 pieces. Swinging back, the dragon again struck at him with its tail and knocked him from his war-horse. The fire of its breath made him faint and dizzy. He rose up, reeling like a dying man. But his strength returned in a marvellous way when he drew his magic sword Ascalon. In trying to strike him once more, the dragon exposed a tender part of its body beneath its wings, and there St. George wounded it. So deep was the wound that the dragon stood still and trembled. St. George then knelt down and prayed. "Undo your sash and tie it about the dragon's neck. It will not harm you," he said to Princess Sabra. The princess did so. "Now lead it to the marketplace in the city," he said. The dragon followed the princess as meekly as a lamb. When they reached the city, all the people ran away, but St. George told them to have no fear. The dragon was now quite harmless, and with a blow of his magic sword Ascalon, he killed the monster in the marketplace. "I did this," he said to the pagans, "to show you the power of God, and to convert you to the true faith." When the pagans learned that it was a Christian knight who had subdued the dragon and made it as meek as a lamb, they gave up their false idols and became good Christians. Princess Sabra was the first to be baptized, and it was not long before she was married to her true knight, the brave St. George of Merry England, who had saved her from such a terrible death.